Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Military Museums. My name is David Peabody. I'm the manager here at the museums, and it's my honor to host you here this morning on this somber occasion as we mark the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Before I continue, I'd like to quickly acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Treaty 7 Nations of Alberta and the Region 3 Métis Nation of Alberta. We gather with heavy hearts today here in the Queen Elizabeth II atrium. The Queen had many roles in life. Those are being recognized around the world as she meant a lot of things to a lot of different people. A lot of people are reflecting on exactly what her legacy has been. And what we are going to focus on today is the Queen's connection to the Canadian Armed Forces. Upon joining the Canadian Armed Forces, we all swear an oath of allegiance to defend Her Majesty, or His Majesty now. And that is something we, in our day-to-day routine, we tend to lose sight of, but often when in trying circumstances, when our job becomes tough, it's something we can go back to and reflect on. It is an oath. We have sworn it and we uphold it. For many here, there are personal connections with Her Majesty. And they know very well that Her Majesty went well out of her way to show her support and her consideration for her regiments and the soldiers within them. To speak more on that, I'd like to invite retired Major Kent Griffiths, MMM CD, who has personally met the Queen on 2 occasions, Kent, or more?
Quite a few.
Quite a few. To provide a eulogy and to speak as well to the connection between the Queen and the military museums. Kent?
Thank you, Dave. Welcome all. Queen Elizabeth II was the longest reigning sovereign in modern Canadian history. Her Majesty surpassed the length of Queen Victoria's reign on September 9th, 2015, and was the longest serving head of state in the world. The Queen and the late Duke of Edinburgh were the longest married royal couple in our history, having marked over 73 years together prior to Prince Philip's death on April 9th, 2021. Canada marked Her Majesty's silver, golden, diamond, and platinum jubilees. Prior to becoming Queen, Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh took part in the 1951 royal tour, including a very full day during her visit to Calgary on Thursday, October 18th. In 1959, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip were scheduled to stop in Calgary on Thursday, July 9th, arriving at the Calgary Municipal Airport around 5 p.m. A busy evening was planned for them and was designed around the theme of informality, letting the public see their monarch, and making the tour as restful and interesting as possible for the royal party. The result was a Western-style barbecue. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip also visited Canada twice in 1973. Their first visit from June 25th to July 5th included a stop in Calgary. In fact, Calgary was the last stop of Their Majesty's trip. One of the reasons for this trip was for the Queen to participate in events across Canada to mark the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Centennial. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth visited Calgary again in 1990. Although she was usually accompanied by Prince Philip on her travels, he did not accompany her on this trip. The Queen was in Calgary from Wednesday, June 27th to Saturday, June 30th, with a midday trip to Red Deer on Thursday, June 28th. June 30th Her Majesty's last day in Calgary was a busy one. At 11:20 a.m., she opened the Museum of the Regiments at Canadian Forces Base Calgary, which is where we are sitting right now, followed by a luncheon with the members of the museum board staff. It was then off to McMahon Stadium, where Her Majesty, Colonel-in-Chief, inspected the King's Own Calgary Regiment and the Calgary Highlanders before presenting a new Queen's color to the Calgary Highlanders. Virtually every seat in the stadium was filled, and a large contingent of veterans, the Old Guard, was seated on the field itself. Despite a violent thunderstorm that morning, the weather was perfect. Her Majesty's arrival was signaled by a 21-gun salute fired by the 20th Independent Battery Royal Canadian Artillery from Lethbridge. Lieutenant Colonel Maitland then led 6 guards of Calgary Highlanders in the march past in slow and quick time, followed by a King's Own Calgary Regiment roll past in Cougar armored vehicles and in open vehicles. Then, hundreds of veterans from both regiments, including 4 or 5 from the First World War, marched past the Queen. Her Majesty responded with the following message to the commanding officers involved. I am delighted to send you and to all ranks of the regiments on parade my heartfelt congratulations on today's ceremony. I was much impressed by your drill and turnout and by the bearing and formidable company of veterans. As your Colonel-in-Chief, I send every good wish to you and the soldiers of my regiments, past and present. In 2005, the Queen of Canada and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh visited Calgary from May 23rd to May 25th to celebrate the Alberta Centennial. The first stop was at the military museums for a private tour in recognition of the Year of the Veteran and to open the new galleries for the Navy and the Air Force. The Queen Elizabeth Atrium was also named in Her Majesty's honor. Once the festivities concluded, the Calgary Highlanders joined with members of the King's Own Calgary Regiment to form a 100-man departure guard within the Saddle Dome. It was not the original plan to include Calgary on this royal visit. However, because the Queen of Canada has had such an affection with the military, and especially due to the fact that Her Majesty was the Colonel-in-Chief of the Canadian Corps of Engineers, the King's Own Calgary Regiment, and the Calgary Highlanders, a solitary visit to Edmonton would not suffice. When the schedule was drafted by the protocol aides, Her Majesty responded that it had to be changed to include a visit with her soldiers in Calgary. The plans to visit Canada, interestingly began with a visit to Buckingham Palace in the summer of 2003. I took part in a personal audience with the Queen at Buckingham Palace as the Regimental Sergeant Major, accompanied by the Honorary Colonel and commanding officers of the Calgary Highlanders. We arrived in London to report to Her Majesty on the status of the Calgary Highlanders, and the royal audience was to be of short duration, usually not more than about 15 minutes. But once the military business of her regiment was concluded and personal conversations had commenced, the meeting continued for 45 minutes. The topics range from the discovery of BSE cow, mad cow, in Alberta or perhaps Saskatchewan, the political climate in Western Canada, the training of drug dogs for Canada Border Services, to the creation of a new charter public school at the time in Calgary called Juno Beach Academy of Canadian Studies. All of those subjects fascinated Queen Elizabeth and eventually caused the audience with the British Chief of Defence Staff to be postponed until after lunch. In detail, the audience took place in one of the Queen's private suites due to the palace being prepared for public tours that would begin the following week. It commenced with a formal announcement, bows, and introductions, followed by an offer from Her Majesty to be seated. Queen Elizabeth sat in a comfortable chair with Lieutenant Colonel Villager to her right, Colonel Gibson and myself on the small sofa across from them. In the hearth of the fireplace in that room was a sheet of heavy paper cut in jagged lines along the top and colored red and orange. We each wondered as to its origin and later agreed that it must have been homemade fire created by one of the youngest of the royal family to provide a warm and personal touch to Her Majesty's living room. So this wasn't just a suite for entertaining special guests. We were in the heart of Her Majesty's home. We also noticed that many of the military statues and plaques that had been presented to the Queen as gifts from her soldiers were prominently displayed in the palace. This was a surprise to me personally, because I had assumed that they would be in some museum or the likes, but it was clear that they were very important to Her Majesty. Noticing these details, I was overcome with a feeling of appreciation that I was allowed into her private home as a guest, not only a business guest, but a trusted member of intimate acquaintances who were afforded frank and honest conversation. For this reason, I'm not at liberty to relay many of the details of this audience, as Her Majesty communicated many personal opinions and views. This feeling of trust began at the gates of Buckingham Palace, where when we arrived, we were greeted by the duty police constables. I informed them that we had an appointment to speak with Her Majesty. The police officers checked their list and confirmed this. Each of we three Highlanders were wearing our full dress uniforms at the time, and we were admitted into Buckingham Palace, each carrying a sword, a dirk, and a ski-and-do sock knife. So we didn't go through any metal detectors or any other security, and this I found a little bit strange. Eventually, we were allowed to sit within touching distance of Her Majesty in a private room with no guards. As I said, there had been no metal detectors, bomb dogs, or other security measures imposed upon us. At that point, I realized that Her Majesty knew, without a doubt, that we were three of her most loyal subjects and had no reason to fear or question our fidelity. The conversation began with Lieutenant Colonel Villager explaining the current status of her regiment, including the strength and mission tasks. There was an elaboration as to the accomplishments of the pipe band, the infantry companies, as well as the association and the museum. This continued with a number of questions and answers, and then turned to topics of a personal nature. Her Majesty divulged an experience that she had during a visit with some wounded soldiers. I'm sure I could see a tear in her eye as she told of an infantry corporal who had been injured in Iraq and was recovering in London. He was to return to operational deployment as soon as he recuperated. Her Majesty found it sad that he had to go back after being wounded and asked how this was handled with Canadian soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Villager replied that if the injury could not be treated in theater and the soldier had to be returned to Canada, there was no requirement to finish that tour of duty. The Queen explained that she liked that idea and would speak to the British Army on the subject. From the Queen's dialogue, I got the impression that one reason that she was so partial to soldiers was that they embrace and live by the very principles that she valued the most herself. We concluded our dialogue with Her Majesty by delivering an invitation to visit Calgary in 2005 for the centennial of Alberta and hopefully the new wing of the Military Museum. It came to pass that Her Majesty eventually did visit Calgary, and much to the dismay of the Department of Protocol, took time to combine the opening of the Air Force and Navy wings at the museum with a photo session and an intimate opportunity to speak to the soldiers of her three regiments. At the museum, prior to the photo sessions, upon recognizing me, which is amazing considering my newly shaved head and my uniform without a kilt, Queen Elizabeth smiled and conversed with me like an old friend. we discussed the centennial and how fortunate it was to live in a prosperous province such as Alberta. Unfortunately, Her Majesty's time at the museum was as short as her visit to Calgary. However, upon departure, the Queen remarked about how satisfying and impressive the trip to Calgary and the show at the Saddle Dome had been. Now, as we witness flags half-masted throughout the mourning period, and we say goodbye to our Queen, we offer heartfelt condolences to the King and to members of the royal family, as well as to the many people throughout the Commonwealth who will be feeling a profound sense of loss as we mark the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen will be deeply missed. Her legacy will also live on through her relationship with this country, this province and city, over the years and the length of time that she has been our Queen, together with her commitment to the Commonwealth. As we mourn the Queen's passing, we are thankful for the long life she has lived, devoted to our service and the service of the entire Commonwealth. We hope that she has now found rest and peace everlasting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. There are very few, I think, in this city that could convey those feelings as well as you have. I'd now like to invite Honorary Colonel Fred Mannix, former Honorary Colonel of the Calgary Highlanders, to the podium to say a few words.
Well, Kent has covered a lot of the issues that I would have covered as well, but we would not be here in this building if it wasn't for Queen Elizabeth. British custom is when you're made an honorary colonel or a colonel in one of British regiments, that you attend upon your colonel-in-chief. And when I was made full colonel and of the Highlanders, I wrote to England and said I would attend upon her if she wished, and got a reply back to be at the gates of Buckingham Palace at 5 to 11 on the 23rd of May. Well, it was quite a trip through the gates, because the British, as you will all know by the funeral ceremonies going on, are masters of drama, of showmanship, and well, they just do it all the best. In any event, as I went in, the Grenadier Guards went out, gave me an eyes left. I was in full dress uniform as Kent described. Again, much like Kent, my audience with the Queen was 45 minutes. I'd been warned that she would ask 3 questions. The first was, what were we doing with regard to preservation of the history of the regiment? Secondly, what were we doing in terms of relationships with the community? And the third one, how was the regiment performing? I was prepared for them all, and as it happened, the honorary colonel of the Patricias, see, memory doesn't work well. Anyway, we had proposed a museum here of the 4 regiments, the Patricias, the Strathconas, the Calhighs, and the King's Own. But we weren't getting anywhere, and we had been trying to raise money to take over this building, and we weren't getting very far. But in terms of trying to protect the histories of the regiments, I explained that to the Queen, and the Queen said, well, that's easy, Colonel. She said, you announce that I am coming to Calgary to open the museum, and all the governments will put up their money. city, provincial, and federal. And she said, be sure you ask for more than you need by 10%. And a little later on, I was in good shape because we were putting together the regimental book. In the regimental book, she opened it, we had the picture of her in the orders of the Scottish archers, and she said, no, in my Canadian regiment, we will use the picture taken of me facing left without the shawl, taken by Karsh. So she was very specific on what she wanted in the book. And then she flipped the page or two, and there was the colors. We were still carrying the Union Jack. She said, in my Canadian regiment, we will carry a maple flag. I will have a color parade when I come and open the museum. Now, as a good messenger, and I always call myself a messenger, I brought that message back, and sure enough, all the governments put up their money, and sure enough, she came to open the museum, and we did have, as Kent has already said, a parade at Mawada, and we filled the place. Now, one of the interesting things about the parade at Mawada, and the Canadian protocols are, you're not supposed to talk to the Queen, even though you're honorary and so on. I took the time to go and see the trooping of the color in England, and I observed how the colonels all spoke to her during their ceremony, and when I came back, I said, I'm not going to follow the Canadian protocol, I'm not speaking to her. And during the Old Guard parade, when they went by, I mentioned to her 11 different people. She was supposed to leave immediately after the parade. She didn't. She walked down to the Old Guard, she went through the Old Guard, and she spoke to every one of those 11 members of the Old Guard. And asked, and knew, because of what I had told her, why they were important in the Old Guard. We did have World War I vets, of course, and we had Stan Waters was in the Old Guard. So she spoke to every one of them. That's how concerned she was about them knowing that she was concerned about them. So, in short, this is her museum. She seized on the idea, she set up the mechanism to finance it, and of course, every time she was here, she wanted to come and see it. And as Kent said, the protocol people got all upset when they had set out a program of her visit, and I happened to run into the Queen's second secretary, and he was saying he was having trouble getting the itinerary set, and what was the issues, and I said it was the protocol in Edmonton, and he said, I'll fix that. And the protocol people, when they saw the actual schedule that the Queen put out, they said, oh no, we had a vote on that. And he said, yes, there was a vote, but only one vote counts, and that was the Queen's, and this is what she wants to do. So anyway, she was very, very interested in the museum here. She was more than interested in our soldiers across the board, and we couldn't have had a better Colonel-in-Chief as the Calgary Highlanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Mannix. That's very interesting. It's some of what you've said is the first time I've heard those connections, and very enlightening. And a great segue. If you look at the mural behind me and look below the portrait of the Queen in the top row, dead center is a much younger Elizabeth II. And what not a lot of people know is that she served as well during World War II as a vehicle mechanic. So her connection to the military and the service was not just ceremonial. It was personal. And I'm proud to announce that this atrium, Queen Elizabeth II atrium, will remain so named, and her portrait will continue to be displayed prominently above the mural in honor of her memory. That said, I'd ask you all please to stand and join me in a moment of silence. Remember that for others. Piper was Michael O'Sullivan, a corporal with the Calgary Highlanders. Thank you, Michael, for being here with us today. Your Majesty, rest in peace. Now, in honor of the coronation of King Charles III, I invite you all to join me in the singing of God Save the King. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our brief ceremony this morning. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you very much to Kent for your excellent remarks and history, and Colonel Mannix as well for your context with the Queen's special relationship to the museum. I'd invite you all to please enjoy a layout of scones and tea that we have put on. This will be here throughout the day for all our guests to enjoy, and to reminisce and share your thoughts and memories of Her Majesty. Thank you.